Okay, class, this is part 3 of a series of videos that I'm creating regarding the trig function or graphing trig function. And in this part 3, we're going to focus in on the cosine function. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so the question here is what does the cosine function look like and what is the period of the cosine function? Okay, so again we have the unit circle like we did with the first video, and we're going to go ahead and fill out this chart and then begin to put these components in this Cartesian coordinate graphing system. All right, so the first thing we want to identify is what is the cosine of pi over 6, okay? Hopefully you'll understand that this is part of a 30, 60, 90 degree triangle, and the cosine of pi over 6 is actually square root of 3 over 2, okay? And then the cosine of pi over 4, we should know by now, is square root of 2 over 2. And then the cosine of pi over 3 is going to be 1/2, okay? And then the cosine of pi over 2 is 0, okay? Remember, the cosine is essentially the x values of a coordinate, and the sine is the y value, okay? So it's going to be cosine, comma, sine, or x, comma, y. So now we're focused on the cosine. So since we have all of these values put together, the rest of these are basically the same. The only difference is we need to be careful of the sign, okay? So not the sine function, but when I say sine, I'm talking about positive or negative, okay? So remember, cosine is positive in the first quadrant, so all these values are positive, and then cosine is negative in the second and third quadrant, and then positive in the fourth quadrant, okay? So these numbers are going to be negative, these values are going to be negative, and then these we will return back to positive. Okay, so the cosine of 2 pi over 3 is going to be negative 1/2, and then the cosine of 3 pi over 4 is going to be negative square root of 2 over 2, and then the cosine of 5 pi over 6 is going to be negative square root of 3 over 2, okay? And then the cosine of pi is going to be 0. And then moving on to the third quadrant, the cosine of 7 pi over 6 is going to be negative square root of 3 over 2. Cosine of 5 pi over 4 is going to be negative square root of 2 over 2. And then the cosine of 4 pi over 3 is going to be negative 1/2. And then the cosine of 3 pi over 2 is 0, okay? All right, so we made it all the way around here, and now we're going to finish up the last quadrant, okay? So then the cosine of 5 pi over 3 is going to be positive 1/2. Cosine of 7 pi over 4 is going to be positive square root of 2 over 2. The cosine of 11 pi over 6 is going to be positive square root of 3 over 2. And then the cosine of 2 pi will be 0. All right, so if we go ahead and graph these, the first point here is pi over 6 comma square root of 3 over 2. That's going to give us this blue line, and that's going to put us at pi over 6 is right about here, and that y value is square root of 3 over 2, okay? Notice we said square root of 3 over 2, that's right about here. Square root of 3 over 2 is about 0.8, okay? So it's close, fairly close to 1. And then we go ahead and graph the rest. So cosine of pi over 4 is going to be square root of 2 over 2. So that's going to put us right about here. and then the cosine of pi over 3 is 1/2. So that's going to put us right over here. Okay, now pi over 2, cosine of pi over 2 is 0. Okay, so that means that at pi over 2, we just put a dot there. And then continuing on, cosine of 2 pi over 3 is negative 1/2. All right, so we're going to plot it right here. And then cosine of 3 pi over 4 is negative square root of 2 over 2. So that's going to put us right about here. And then lastly, cosine of 5 pi over 6 is negative square root of 3 over 2. So that means we're going to take this blue one, put it right about there. And then cosine of pi, I incorrectly stated that it is 0. It is actually 1. Okay? I was thinking of the y value, which is sine, and it should be the x value for cosine. And I also did the same thing with 2 pi. 2 pi should be 1, not 0. All right? Okay, so let's go ahead and continue with graphing. Cosine of 7 pi over 6 is going to be negative square root of 3 over 2. Okay, so we're going to take this blue one, put that about there. Okay, and then cosine of 5 pi over 4 is negative square root of 2 over 2. So we're going to take one of the green ones, plot that right there, and then cosine of 4 pi over 3 is negative 1/2. So we're going to take a red one of these, right there. Okay, and then cosine of 3 pi over 2 is 0. So we're going to just put a dot there. And then we're going to finish up the last quadrant. Cosine of 5 pi over 3 is 1/2. So that's going to put us about here. Oops, sorry, we're at the positive, not negative anymore. So that should put us right about there. And then the cosine of 7 pi over 4 is positive square root of 2 over 2. So that puts us about right there. And then lastly, the cosine of 11 pi over 6 is positive square root of 3 over 2. So that puts us about right there. All right? Okay, so if we were to connect these points here, we start at 1. And it comes down, hits 0, comes around here. All right, cosine of pi is 1. I forgot to plot that, so that's right up here. Okay, and over here. So if we continue graphing, you'll see what this looks like. Okay. So that is the cosine function. And what is the period of this function? Well, we start at 0, okay, and this curve comes down, and as we progress to pi, it hits a minimum, and then as we move towards 2 pi, it comes back up to where we started. And if we were to continue past 2 pi, you'll see that this will come back down, and up, down, up, down, up. All right, so what we'd say is that the period of this function is essentially 2 pi, okay, because the cycle repeats itself after 2 pi. All right, so let's compare the sine and cosine functions that we've graphed so far, okay? Basically, what we're seeing is that in this red graph, this is our sine function, and our blue graph is our cosine function. And you'll see that the sine function and the cosine function are essentially the same, but there is a phase shift by pi over 2. Okay, so in other words, if I were to take this red function, okay, and just slide it over to the left by pi over 2, it would be identical to the cosine function. And similarly, if I were to take the cosine function and just slide it over pi over 2 to the right, to a positive pi over 2, you'd see that the function would match the sine function exactly the same. Okay, so moving forward, if you were to ask to graph a sine or cosine function, it should be fairly simple. In other words, if you were asked to graph a sine function, a regular sine x function, okay, you start at 0. You know that this has a period of 2 pi. So then you would go up to 1 at pi over 2, come back down to 0 at pi, and then go down to -1 at 3 pi over 2, and then back to 0 at 2 pi. So that would be your sine function. With the cosine function, we'd start at 1, come down to pi over 2 or 0 at pi over 2, and then to -1 at pi, and then back to 0 at 3 pi over 2, and then back to 1 at 2 pi. Okay, so that was a long-winded way to explain the sine and cosine function, but hopefully understanding the derivation helps provide better context for you. If any of this was confusing or you need to listen to it again, please go back to the beginning of the recording. Thank you.